then everything would be okay. I think the trouble is that there isn't really any different than our everyday life. It's simply how we look at it. It's just this little turn in how we view things, and then it all just opens up. It's like looking around the corner on a familiar street and seeing everything in a new light. It isn't devastating. It just doesn't knock you down. There aren't, some people have those experiences. I will grant you, but I don't think that's the norm. I think that most people find some degree of peace and contentment if they start looking for it, and that slowly grows over the years. It just sort of builds and builds, and I know with myself what it is. It's this feeling of I can accept more and more because I see how everything that I used to oppose kind of fits into my worldview, kind of like, remember that video game called Tetris where the little blocks fell? And on the way down you're thinking, well, where's it going to go? And then all of a sudden it fits right where it's supposed to. And you can't explain it. And a lot of times you can't even put it into words. It's like a lot of people will challenge me, again, because I'm a chaplain. There's 30 or 40 chaplains at the hospital. They're all volunteers, and they all come from different walks of life. And because I'm a self-proclaimed Buddhist, they all think I'm just above devil incarnate. And that's okay, because I have a lot of really meaningful discussions with them, and I've gotten to know most of them over the years. And we'll sit there and they'll say things, and I'll say, well, yeah, I completely agree with you. I don't see anything, there's nothing you're saying that I don't fundamentally and almost specifically agree with. Because I see how it fits into a larger worldview of it's this and that instead of this or that, which some of these people have been coming for years are gonna, I repeat myself a lot, but I like to try and cast these basic ideas into different lights as time goes on, so that it's kind of like, oh, that's what he means, or that one metaphor is what actually gets over on everybody. So, but in one of the fundamental concepts, or one of the fundamental teachings in Buddhism, is that the world is not made up of this or that. It's made up of this and that. So there's two sides to everything. Of course there is. Let's look around us, There's light and dark, white and dark, black, Everything has its supposed opposite, but if it didn't have the opposite, it wouldn't exist. If there was no darkness, we wouldn't know what light was. We wouldn't recognize it as being, if there was no hot, there'd be no cold. So we tend, especially in the Western culture, in the Western, the way the scientific world looks at things, we tend to separate things and say that we can look at them separately. That, there's hot, and then there's cold, and they're separate, but they're not. Everything is simply two sides to the same coin. And when you start looking at everything that way, you start to understand that everything is interconnected, interrelated, and that it's very difficult to pull one thing out of the matrix of everything and say this is separate. There's a phrase in Buddhism called interdependent, help me, Roy.
Co-origination.
Co-origination, thank you. Interdependent co-origination. And what it is, it's a way of looking at the world and understanding that everything relies on everything, and that nothing can exist outside of the whole. Now, our brains are very good at differentiation. They're almost like computers because they look at ones and zeros in a way, so that we are able to differentiate the difference and pull something out, but it's not real. We create a false sense of being when we take something and say that it's separate. In reality, you can't separate it, because everything that it needs to exist as a separate entity is all the things around it. I mean, you can't take a flower and say, well, the flower is separate because it needs water and soil and sunlight, needs bees for propagation. So if you took any one of those things away, it wouldn't exist. So everything, especially us, rely on everything around us. And so, but we're trained as we grow up to think of ourselves as separate, that we can do anything we want. You know what? If I don't want to do that, I don't have to. And I'm just going to, I'm going to live my life this way. I don't care what everybody else does. I'm going to protect myself, my family, my household, my this, my that, and forget everybody else, But it doesn't work that way, And we're constantly being bombarded by this idea that we can live as separate entities in this world. However separate we want to talk about, whether it's the self or the state or the nation or even a part of the world. We want to say, well, I want to do what's right for that, and I don't care about the rest of it. Well, the world is global. That's a profound statement. Write that down. But what I mean by that is that everybody relies on everything, and everyone needs everything. So even though we would love to say, it would be much simpler if I could just take care of myself, because I think I have a little bit of control there. You don't. But you want to think you do, and that's much easier than trying to figure out what to do on a national level, or let alone a global level. We want to boil it down to the smallest thing that we think we can control without having any outside influence affect us. I don't care how small you go, it doesn't work. I've been down to a cellular level. If I pick out one cell in my body, it needs so many things from its environment that I can't even separate the most infinitesimal thing. And if you believe that there's some energy behind everything, whatever we want to call that, if there's something greater than this material realm that we live in, then everything relies on that as well. So if we start looking at everything that way, we start to understand that, and this is a leap, but we start to understand that we don't know what's best or right, even for ourselves. We just don't know. I'm not going to get into individual things that's going on in the world right now, because it tends to polarize our thinking. But, I'll just be talking generalities. Who leads us? I don't know who should lead us from a global standpoint or a timeless standpoint. I look back in history and I look at all the things that have happened, and there were a lot of horrible things that happened, but out of those horrible things, good things came. So how do I know if I'm not just in that cycle again? Of course I am, but most people don't want to think that maybe we need something right now that's not so good. However, whatever your belief system is, whatever you call not so good, maybe we need that to hold a mirror up to ourselves and say, I don't want to be that way, or I see now that that doesn't work, so therefore I know what to do next. So we can, if we start to see that interconnectedness and how everything relies on everything, we can get a little longer view of what's going on, not just with ourselves, but with everything else. And we can rest in that idea that we don't know. We simply don't. We want to know. Of course we want to know. That's, gosh. I think sometimes we subconsciously categorize the world. And we say, well, I know I like this, and I know I like that, and I certainly don't like this, and I wouldn't want to be that way. I mean, we don't write it down. Maybe some people do, but I mean, we want to create an environment and a mental construct within our minds where we feel comfortable and safe with everything around us. And the way we mainly do that is we exclude things. We exclude the things we don't want. I don't like this, I don't like that, I don't like those kind of people. All of these things, and we try and build this bubble around us that is only filled with what we're comfortable with and the people we're comfortable with, and we want to be around like-minded people. And we don't want to see things that we find irritating, disgusting, uncomfortable. We don't want to think about, things that are awful that are happening because that makes us sad. So we try and create this insulary bubble that we live in of the things that we think will make us happy. It doesn't work. It's never worked and it never will. And yet, as a species, we keep trying and trying to do what's impossible. And what's that old saying about if you keep doing the same thing over and over again, what's the definition? That's the definition of insanity. And we're insane. And in some level, we're all a little bit insane because we keep thinking that we can create that perfect environment. Some people refer to it as like arranging the furniture in your living room. If you can get everything just right, then I'll be happy. And then we start thinking that we can't be happy until all those things are right. And that is a recipe for disaster, because happiness, peace, contentment, and joy do not come from things outside of ourselves. They only come from the inside. And the only control, and those, interestingly enough, those are the very things that we have the most control over, and yet we're taught they're the things we have the least control over. Why am I not happy? So we look around. Well, there's, my spouse is doing this, my family's doing that, the country's doing this. That's why I'm unhappy. So I'm going to go fix those things. Why do people try and fix things? They try and fix them to make themselves feel better. I'm sorry to say, we'd all like to think we're all totally altruistic and we're out there, trying to right the wrongs of the world for the world. Deep enough if we look, we will see that we're actually trying to make ourselves happy. And we think that by fixing something outside of ourselves, that we'll feel better about ourselves, and that will bring happiness through, quite honestly, others telling us that we did a good job. We're looking for
warm fuzzies.
well, but we're looking for someone to tell us that, good boy.
Yeah.
We're looking for someone to say, you did good.
Validation.
We all appreciate what you're doing.
Validation.
Validation, thank you. That's the word I was looking for.